So on a daily basis, you'll see on your television screen horrific pictures of the situation in Gaza. Israeli soldiers now on the ground in the enclave, trying to get into the tunnel system run under Gaza by Hamas. The consequences on the ground for Palestinians, as you know, are just horrendous. Well, Israel says it will not agree to a ceasefire. It particularly wants the hostages held by Hamas and wants to literally destroy Hamas in totality. Meanwhile, this conflict has led to huge debates within many societies. In Dagestan, a Russian republic over the weekend, a group of people broke into an airport wanting to attack Israelis who had just landed on an El Al plane. In the UK, a top parliamentary aide has had to resign after saying he believed there should be a ceasefire. And here you would have seen and heard the huge debates the situation in the Middle East creates. Mdunge is a political analyst. He's at the University of Dundee in the UK. Musa, good afternoon to you. There's something about this conflict that really resonates in so many different ways with so many different people. Why does the Middle East conflict have this immense power in so many parts of the world?
Thank you so much, Stephen. Good afternoon to you and to your viewers. So indeed, Israel and the Hamas conflict is definitely one of those issues that is at the center of so many debates around so many dinner tables and pubs, around the world, including our own country. And I believe that the reason for that is because Israel is, of course, the center of three major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And so given the importance of these religions in the societies, both in democracies and in authoritarian regimes across both the global north as well as the global south, this issue is sure to divide so many people and so many governments, and is a critical issue given as well the location that Israel has, really very much at the center of the globe, and particularly when we look at geopolitics. The Middle East is such an important region, both in terms of its role and position and significance politically and religiously, but as well as for the very fact economically. When we think of oil, natural gas, and so many other resources, this region is very critical to the great powers and to other countries as well.
Is there something about identity? I mean, this is very much an oversimplification. So if you're a white person from a Western country, I think most people would assume you support Israel. If you're a person of color from a country in the global south, I think most people would assume you support Palestine. And I mean, sure, obviously there are huge differences within that, but that's possibly largely true.
Indeed. Look, there are divisions across the world. Certainly from the global south perspective, we do see a greater gravitation towards support for Palestine, particularly when you consider, the history of the world, particularly when we look at issues such as colonization, imperialism, as well as apartheid. And when we look in particularly from a West Africa perspective, slavery. We know in our own country, we have our own history of slavery in South Africa. And so indeed, the plight and the experience of the Palestinian people is one that we share very intimately in South Africa, given our own experience. And thus the positions that have been adopted not only by the South African government, but driven particularly by the ANC, but broader civic society. There seems to be a push that we need a peaceful solution in this crisis, particularly one that speaks to a two-state solution, as has always been the advocation of countries such as South Africa, Brazil, and other countries of the global south. We know the impediments to this issue, and that's particularly in the global north, particularly in the United States, where we see that support for Israel remains strong, and that America has not been an honest broker of peace. And so this particular conflict shines a light and a spotlight, particularly on whether Pax Americana, the American peace, is still worth the paper it's written on, or are we seeing certainly a change? And what does it mean? And who steps into that role to fill that void and be a broker of peace in that region? Is it possibly China? Is it the United Kingdom? Or do we see a third party, a neutral party, from a non-aligned movement such as South Africa? Time will tell what will be the case.
There's certainly other things that are happening. I mean, societies are changing, and it's quite interesting to watch. So the United States used to be really a sort of white country with African-American people who had formerly been slaves. It's no longer that. It's something much more complex now. In the UK, the Prime Minister actually comes has an Asian background, the same, intriguingly, of the Scottish Nationalist Party in the United Kingdom. And so what I'm trying to get to is that these societies are changing. So you have people with very different identities, often making decisions within them. And in all of these countries, in fact, the number of Muslim people has been growing strongly. In the United States, for a long time, there has been a very big minority of people of the Jewish faith. Now there's also a big minority of people of the Muslim faith. So these societies themselves surely are going to have more divisions about this conflict, just because the people within these societies have also changed over the last 50 years.
Indeed, very much so. You know, when you look at these countries, of course, there are demographic shifts that are happening in every country around the world. You know, that is, of course, the beauty, in some cases, depending, you know, your politics, and in some cases, it is a very, you know, contentious issue when we think about the role of globalization in driving immigration movement around the world. You know, borders are now not as significant as they used to be. And so there is a challenge to territorial sovereignty. And so indeed, in these countries, we see that shift, and that is informing the complexities around the kind of positions that the governments in these countries take. And certainly when we look in the United Kingdom, certainly there's been a spotlight on Rishi Sunak's approach and his position and the position of the Conservative Party. There are divisions within that party, as we know, you know, as well as when we look at the position taken by Labour Party, which is very much, you know, an unknown position. You know, there is no clarity in the position that the Labour Party under Keir Starmer has taken. And that may well be a factor in next year's elections and affect how people think about the Labour Party and the potential for it to lead, particularly because the issue of this conflict sits around really the issue of security, both for Britain's citizens as well as American citizens and other citizens around the global north and certainly the global south. And so certainly, given that, you know, and the historical connections and perspectives in the United Kingdom, there's been a perception here that, you know, when it comes to issues around security, foreign policy, that the Conservative Party is stronger and more trusted. And that's really been a battle that the Labour Party has had to fight. And this is a potential issue that will really be a case and a test for Keir Starmer and Labour Party. And so around the world, political parties are really grappled with this issue. What kind of positions do they take, given there's this rise in these countries for support for Palestine? And when we look even on demographic levels, younger people are more inclined to support Palestine, where older people are more inclined to support the Israelis. And moreover, if we look on party divisions, we see that the Labour Party, more people prefer neutrality in position by the United Kingdom government or support for Palestine. And it's different when we look at the Conservative Party. So the Ipsos poll was very much informative and eye-opening in that sense. Where, Stephen, if you'd allow me to make this point, where I think it falls short is potentially on the issue of rather also looking at other parties within the United Kingdom. We look at the Liberal Party, we look at the SNP, you know, we look at the DUP in Ireland. You know, we know that this poll didn't look at the sentiments of these voters who may potentially be important in next year's elections if the Labour Party falls short, and we likely see a hung parliament in next year's elections, which will mean there would need to be some negotiations between these parties in order to form government. And that will have implications on future foreign policy position in the United Kingdom in the same way that we see happening in South Africa, with the potential of next year's elections leading to seismic changes in South Africa's foreign policy position.
Musa, I mean, 2024 is clearly the year of coalitions already. The conflict in the Middle East, this war in Gaza, unfortunately, is going to go on for a very long time. Well, that's certainly how it looks at the moment. And we're likely to see these images on our television screens for a long time. Is this going to deepen divisions in many other societies around the world as a result? It'll go on for a long time. There'll be atrocities, perhaps. The number of children all being injured every day, I read this morning, is over 400. I think that was a figure from UNICEF. That's obviously, these are Palestinian children. The point I'm trying to make is, the longer this goes on, the more division there could be in many societies.
Indeed, the longer this goes on, Stephen, you're quite correct that the divisions will indeed be far more embedded than what we see currently. And that is why there is a need for this moral push and position for really a ceasefire in terms of this conflict. And so countries such as Egypt, such as Turkey, have been playing a very critical role in getting the different sides around the negotiation table. And we see the role that South Africa has played and wants to play in terms of that conflict. And so there is a gravitation towards finding a common position and finding solutions to this potential conflict. But of course, the risks are there when we look at the role that countries such as Iran are taking in the support that they are giving Hamas, when we look at the support Israel is getting from the United States, which has been very clear about its support for Israel actually really, uprooting Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So certainly, divisions are going to be there, and it will really be bound to the value of these divisions in terms of shifting or influencing rather the decisions that voters will take in these countries. When we look on authoritarian regimes, the picture may be slightly different because in those countries, there is a control in the kind of information that is given to the populations there. And so public opinion largely is influenced and shaped by the governments there. And so given these divisions, given, these contexts, what does it mean for a peace process in terms of this conflict? But secondly, greater than that is the question around a possible two-state solution. The time has never been more greater than this for a push for that kind of solution. And it will be very interesting to see the role South Africa can play, the BRICS countries can play, as well as NATO can play. And so United Kingdom also has a role to play.
Musa Mdunge, we have to leave it there. Thank you. Political analyst at the University of Dundee. Really do appreciate the time and the thoughts.